All right, let's see. All right. Looks like we're all here. Okay, so let's see, what are we doing today?
Wait, I don't gotta put my camera on for this class.
Last time, we have to turn that off. So last time we were looking at the first chapter. Let me go get those open again. Now, actually, what we should probably do is go look at Moodle and remind ourselves what we're doing. All right, hold on a second. So we have, all right, so yeah, here we find the syllabus. We've already seen that. Now, today we're ready for chapter 2. Now, I do want to point out, I had a couple of videos lined up for yesterday, and I realized afterwards that I forgot to show them. So I'll make sure that we get a look at them today. But first, let's take a look and see what's going on with chapter 2. It says, so the title is U.S. And global economies. Okay. Let me just, there we go. That looks better.
Excuse me, Professor. Can I ask a question real quick?
Yes.
So I see that on my heliotrope that it says that we meet Tuesdays and Thursdays, but the email that you sent me, I see it. Are we only meeting on Thursdays?
Where does it say that? Oh, sorry. I think I accidentally muted you. Go ahead. Oh, no, I'll tell you what's going on with that. The thing about the Zoom, let me just show you what Zoom looks like here when I set it up. I'll just reopen it real fast. Okay. Sorry about that. So anyway, when I set this thing up, it gives me the opportunity of repeating that meeting. In other words, I can create it once, or I can repeat it. But the problem is that the only options I have are to repeat it every day or to repeat it every week. It doesn't offer me the option of twice a week. So what I had to do is create one string of meetings for Tuesdays and another string of meetings for Fridays. So yes, we do meet on Tuesdays and Fridays at 12:30. Wait, sorry, I'm saying the wrong thing. Mondays and Thursdays. Today's Thursday. God, completely lost track of time here. It is Thursday. So yes. So this one, the one you got today, was the Thursday link. And on Monday, it'll just mention Mondays. And again, that's because of the way Zoom is structured. If you want to repeat the meetings more than once, the only options it gives you are daily and weekly, not twice a week. So I had to create it this way because that's the way it's set up. So yes, going forward, it's always Monday and Thursday at 12:30.
Okay, thank you.
All right, you're welcome. All right. So now, let's see. Now I forgot. Oh, yes, chapter 2. So what we're going to do is we're going to start chapter 2 now. Actually, I'll tell you what. Why don't we watch the videos first, just because they're related to chapter 1. They're basically meant to be an introduction to economics in general, and I think you'll find them to be very interesting and certainly worth watching. But before we do that, now, this is something we have to watch out for. I can show you these videos. Now, right now, they should appear on Moodle, but I'm also going to send you the link in the chat room. Here we go. So, for example, why should you study economics is the first video. Now, you can find that link on Moodle, but what I'm going to do is also send it to you through the chat room. All right, what's going on here? There it is. Now, what I have to do, though, in order to avoid running into issues with YouTube, I have to turn off the screen sharing while the video is showing. So I'm going to watch it on here, but it will not appear in the video if you watch it later on. All right. So you have to watch this now, or else look at the link later on if you're unable to attend the class. So first things first, we'll stop the sharing. So what I want you to do is watch it on your own computer. And so we'll start that right now. And when it's done, then we'll get back together and we'll start the second one. All right.
Someone's not muted.
Okay, let me. Oh, okay, good. Thanks for catching that. All right. Yeah, it's being stubborn. What's going on here? It's refusing. It's actually not allowing me to mute it. I've never seen that before. Huh? What's wrong with this thing? That's unbelievable. I did not expect that to ever happen. It's like, no, I don't want to do that. There it goes. Jesus. Well, that took long enough. All right, so that obviously was a very silly little introduction, but really, all that they're trying to tell you is that, you don't realize how important economics is because it does actually intrude on your daily life on a regular basis. So the more you know about it, obviously, the better off you'll be. Okay, so that one, okay, it's fine. It was a good little introduction, but now this next one I think is going to be a little bit more interesting. So let me get it here, and I'm going to send you the link, and we'll watch that one. And then don't worry, I actually have quite a few more very interesting videos that we can watch throughout the course. Anytime it seems to be justified, we can certainly spend a few minutes watching these very, in my opinion, useful videos. So, all right, let's take a look at this one.
Economists also have their own branch of statistics called econometrics that specialize in
Oh, that was it, huh? All right. Well, that wasn't so bad. I mean, it was pretty interesting, but again, it's just trying to get you to see that economics is a very broad field, and that, as we mentioned the other day, micro is where you look at the small picture, I guess, where you look at the decisions being made by individuals and individual companies, whereas the big picture is macro, where you're looking at the entire economy. So, all right. Well, I just thought, those might be useful, although I was supposed to show them the first day. That's all right. It won't kill us to watch them now. All right. So I'm going to put the screen sharing back on so we can carry on. And we're going to dive into chapter 2. Let's see how it's not a terribly long chapter. We might actually start 3 today, but let's just get started with 2. And now we're going to be looking at a lot of important concepts in this chapter, although the global economies will only briefly touch on that part of it. That'll come up later on in the course. But we're going to start out by simply looking at the different types of goods that are produced in the US economy. And we're going to focus our attention on the types of resources that are needed to produce these goods. And then we'll finally wrap it up with a brief look at the global economy, which is a very important area of study. In fact, you can take an entire course in what's called global economics. In fact, I'm teaching that class right now. It comes actually right after this one is over. And of course, there the focus is 100% on the international picture, where we're looking at how and why the US trades with other countries. And we also look at international finance, which discusses in great detail topics like the strength of the dollar and trade deficits and all those good topics that you might find very interesting. In fact, one day you might want to take that class. All right, anyway. Now, at some point, we're going to introduce a graph, which is an attempt to show how the different sectors of the economy interact with each other. It's called the circular flow of economic activity. And it shows that all the different components of the economy are actually heavily related to each other. Whatever happens in one sector will have a major influence on the rest of the economy. Now, this is what we're trying to accomplish in this chapter. We're going to try to understand what types of goods are produced in the US, what kinds of resources are being used to produce them. We're going to briefly touch on the global economy and look at this circular flow model. All right, well, first of all, what kinds of goods are being produced? So just in the most general possible terms, we're going to break up all goods into one of 2 types. We have what are called consumer goods, which is the ones that you and I actually buy and consume. And then we have what are called capital goods. And the capital goods are the ones that we use to produce consumer goods. So in other words, only businesses will typically buy capital goods. And even then, only so that they can use them to produce consumer goods and earn profits. So consumer goods are everything you could possibly imagine that an individual might buy, like cars and furniture and appliances and food, and the list goes on and on and on, like clothes and TVs and anything that you can imagine that consumers buy will fall into this category. Now, as it turns out, the consumer spending accounts for the largest proportion of the economy. About 2/3 of it comes directly from consumer goods, which we'll see later on in the course. All right, it's mentioned here anyway, but some of these goods, of course, are very inexpensive and we buy them on a regular basis, like food and gas and clothes. In other words, we buy these no matter what the state of the economy looks like. We would not, for example, stop buying clothes or food or gas just because the economy is in a recession. But the other types of goods are very expensive, and these are the ones that you're more likely to cut back on if the economy slows down, like cars and furniture and appliances. And of course, the reason for that is because they're not only expensive, but you're typically financing these with credit. And so, when times are tough, that's not the right time, for example, to be buying a new car. You can probably squeeze a couple more years out of your existing car when the economy is doing badly. When the economy is doing well, that's when you'll probably turn around and buy that new car that you've had your eye on for a while. Now, the capital goods, like I said, these are not consumed directly. These are goods that are used just to produce consumer goods and services, which are then going to be sold to consumers. And so we have things like buildings and equipment and machinery and tools and other things too, like computers, for example. And all of these are only bought by a corporation who's trying to use them to produce goods and services. So a good example of this would be Starbucks. Everybody knows and loves Starbucks, I'm assuming. All right. Is that about the size of it? Do I have any disagreements about that? No, I knew it. That's like sort of a universal. Starbucks. By the way, here's a fun little side fact about Starbucks. The name itself, you may have wondered, where does it come from? The name of Starbucks comes from a very famous 19th century American novel. Which one is it?
Moby Dick.
That's right. Who said that?
It's me. I said it.
David. How did you know that?
Because I read it.
Oh, okay. So one of the sailors on the Pequot is named Starbuck, so that became the name of the franchise. I don't know how they came to that decision, but that's where they chose it from. And so, of course, if you look at their emblem, you'll notice that it is in fact a mermaid. So, and of course, you know that Starbucks was founded in Seattle, which is right on the ocean, and of course, it stands to reason that they would have a maritime theme. All right. Well, I thought you'd find that interesting. Anyway, but what kind of capital equipment would a Starbucks typically have? Well, you've been in Starbucks. Like, for example, the coffee bean grinders. If you buy a pound of coffee in bean form, you may not have a grinder at home. So what can they do for you in the store? They can grind it for you in the store. But how do they do it? Do they take out a little hammer and smack all the beans? No. What do?
The machine.
They put them in the machine, which grinds them up into the coffee grounds that you use at home. What about when they make you an espresso? Well, they've got to have a special machine to do that. Or any of the mixed drinks. They have to have blenders, for example, for the frozen drinks. So there's an awful lot of equipment involved. Now, when Starbucks buys a coffee bean grinder, they're not doing that for its own sake. They're using it because they want to sell more products to the customers. So these are collectively known as what we're going to call capital goods. All right, capital goods. These are a type of investment for Starbucks. They must spend a lot of money on this equipment, but why? Why would they spend so much money on this capital equipment? What are they hoping to accomplish?
Make more money.
Yeah, exactly. They want to use it to make more money. I mean, indirectly by selling more goods to the customers. Okay, so the demand for capital goods, as you can probably guess, is very different than the demand for consumer goods. It's driven by different motivation. Companies buy capital goods to make profits. Why do consumers buy consumer goods? What are you trying to do?
To just enjoy them and like
Exactly. Just for the satisfaction. In other words, why do you go to Starbucks and buy that cappuccino in the first place? Because it tastes so good. All right. And plus, it helps keep you awake if you're studying. I think you've discovered that too from experience. But if you need that, then you might be better off with a double espresso. But anyway, they all will do the job. As you know, Starbucks coffee is very, very potent. So now we're going to turn our attention to the resources that are used to produce these products. So economics typically classifies resources. And by the way, these are resources that are specifically meant to be used to help us produce goods and services for the customers. We typically break up all these resources into these four basic categories. And you can see that they are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Okay, now we've just gotten through discussing what capital is. Capital means the equipment and the machinery and all the rest that's used to produce goods and services. The word land is being used in a very general sense. It doesn't literally mean just land. It includes all natural resources, including land itself. But you can see we have like water and minerals and crude oil and air. These are all things that are not man-made. These are all natural resources. And of course, you typically see this being used in not every corporation, but many corporations use these inputs as part of their production process. Yeah, I mean, so like if in a hydroelectric plant, if you've ever been to Canada, they produce a lot of hydroelectric electricity with hydroelectric plants along the St. Lawrence Seaway because the hills, the water comes gushing down the hills, and they are able to put that to good use. They can harness it and turn it into hydroelectric power or electricity. And then in that case, the land, quote, land that they're using could be considered the actual land, but also the water. Labor, well, we all know what labor is, but we want to be careful here to make sure it's clear that labor can be both physical and mental. All right, so for example, if you're designing a new app for the iPhone, that would be considered mental labor or mental activity. You're thinking about a product that you need and you're creating it, whereas fixing a car's engine is really primarily physical activity. They're both examples of labor. And of course, capital. Now here's an interesting little twist here. Capital can actually be defined as both physical and what we were going to call human capital. What do you suppose human capital is?
Available employees, I guess.
Is it what?
Skilled employees that you have.
Well, that's true. But what we're going to do is think of their skills as what we're actually focusing on here. In other words, just because you have employees doesn't mean that they can produce good products. Human capital refers primarily to skills and knowledge. So, for example, a doctor obviously has an enormous amount of human capital because of all that training and experience that he has. But all types of knowledge, all types of skills that can be used to help contribute to the production of goods and services can be classified as human capital. So by being in college right now, you're increasing the amount of human capital in the United States. Think about that. So when somebody says, why are you in college? You can say, well, I want to contribute to the human capital in the United States. The education that you're getting is a form of human capital. So does it have a value? Of course. Just like physical capital. So in the Starbucks, if all they had was machines, if nobody works there, it doesn't do them any good, does it? A person has to be there to use the machines, and that person requires training and knowledge to do their jobs properly. So no business can survive without both physical and human capital. All right, so these are two very important resources, and the more capital we have available in a country, the higher our standards of living will be because it improves our ability to produce goods and services. Okay. And ultimately, when you try to start thinking about your standards of living, isn't the bottom line what you are able to consume? Like right now, we've got it kind of nice. We've got iPads and iPhones, and we've got the internet and all the rest, which we didn't have 100 years ago. So would you say that our standards of living have risen in the last 100 years? Why, yes. In fact, not even just slightly, by quite a bit. Okay. And it's because technology keeps advancing, the economy keeps growing, the amount of goods and services that are available to us keeps growing. The costs are actually falling in real terms, which we'll discuss later. So physical and human capital are used to produce goods and services, and in the long run, improve our standards of living. Okay. So yes, now by the way, we have to be careful with this word capital. It shows up all over the place. The money that a company raises to run its operations is referred to as financial capital. In other words, let's say Apple issues new stocks because they need the money to develop the next iPhone. That money that they're raising is referred to as financial capital. But the machines that they use to build MacBook Pros would be considered physical capital. And the engineers who design the computers, that would be considered human capital. So yes, this word capital has a lot of potential uses. We just have to be careful with it. Now, entrepreneurship, that's an interesting word. By the way, what language do you think this is coming from?
French.
That's right. It is a French word. Entrepreneur, that is somebody who combines resources in order to produce goods and services in order to earn profits. In other words, the resources don't combine themselves. Somebody had to do that. For example, we have Bill Gates at Microsoft, Stephen Jobs, who's sadly no longer with us, at Apple, and of course, Jeffrey Bezos at Amazon. All right, and of course, you can name so many more, like Elon Musk at Tesla. These are all entrepreneurs, and what they do is they have ideas, they determine what people want, and they find a way to get it to them in such a way that they are profitable, and then they can make themselves quite wealthy. Okay, but somebody's got to bring together all those resources, and so these are called entrepreneurs. Now, all these resources are scarce. So in order for us, let's say I'm a Starbucks again, and I want to use resources. In other words, I need to get capital to use to run my business. I need to hire people. I have an owner, the owner of the entire Starbucks chain. All these resources will earn ultimately a rate of return of some kind. And so in economics, they're classified in the following way. The land owners of land, and remember, this includes natural resources, are earning what we will call rent. Okay, so now even if it isn't literally rent, as long as it's a return to land or other natural resources, we'll call it rent. Okay. Now, of course, laborers earn wages. Why do you work? To get paid. Okay. Capital owners earn what we're going to call interest. And again, it doesn't have to be literally interest, but some type of rate of return. And then finally, why do Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and the rest, why do they bother running a business? Because they're earning profits. That's what they're after, profits. So those are, in economics, we say that these are the returns to resources. Okay. And of course, since resources are scarce, ultimately, the businesses that can use them the most efficiently are the ones that are going to survive, of course. Because let's say, for example, they're all competing with each other for those same resources. And that means they have to be in a position to pay for them. And the only way they can do that is with their profits. Income distribution. This is always a controversial topic. Income distribution has always been unequal, and it always will be. The question is, how unequal is it? So here's an example of the United States. Now, this is going back a few years, but if you look at this thing, you can see that at the bottom, we have people making less than $15,000. And then we go up in stages to the people who are making $200,000 or more. So how do you interpret these bars? For example, what percentage are earning between 50 and 74,999? How can you tell? What are we looking at?
The percentages on the bottom of the graph.
That's right. The width of this bar, if you read down here, that's approximately 17%. Okay. So this is the largest category. The smallest category, it looks like it's this one, where this represents about 6% of the population. And so this is what we call a bar chart. These are very popular for illustrating quantitative data because it's easy to see at a glance what's happening with these numbers. So you can see that if we had perfect everybody, well, the categories are different. Let's just put it that way. And so you're always going to get some people at the very top, and you're going to get people who are at the bottom. All right, so, and everything in between. Now, some countries have more equal distributions than others. The U.S. tends to be relatively unequal, but because of part of that is because it's, let's just say that you've got so many very crazy, successful, wealthy people like Bill Gates, income tends to be more unequally distributed than in other countries. All right, now, all right, so we're going to quickly now take a quick look at the global economy, where this is where we buy and sell merchandise from other countries. Now, you're probably aware that a large percentage of the products that we buy on a daily basis were actually imported from another country. So if, let's say, for example, you were to look in your closet, I don't know if all of your clothes, they might have little tags on them that show where they came from. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but the vast majority of the clothes that we wear were not produced in the United States. Why do you suppose that is? Are we terrible clothes makers?
The question is why a lot of the what's the word? Why a lot of the labor is done in other countries?
Yes. In other words, why are we importing jeans from India instead of making them ourselves?
Oh, it's cheaper to do to have them made in India.
It's cheaper now, but now the question is why?
We have a minimum wage.
Well, that too, but here's the bottom line. And this is something you see more about in a global economy course, but what does the population of India look like compared to the United States?
Much bigger, right?
It's huge. The last time I checked, I think India's population, let's find out. It's over 1 billion, that's for sure. Wow, that's about 1 billion more than the United States. In other words, their population is roughly 4 times the size of the United States. So that means there's a lot of people looking for jobs. And if that's the case, what is likely to be the case about their wages compared to the US, I mean?
Lower, I'd imagine, right?
Yes, in fact, quite a bit lower. So what if you are a company who says, listen, we can have jeans made here or in India. In the United States, the workers will cost us $25 an hour. In India, it's going to cost us $6 an hour. What do you decide to do? How about build them and make them in India? Because it's $6 an hour versus $25 an hour. And so that's kind of a, it's not a tough decision. But on the other hand, what about really high-tech products like computer chips? Where are they likely to be produced?
Would it be in areas where it's like, I'm not entirely sure, with like places where people are much more involved? Yeah, like the chat saying the USA. Yeah.
Right. So yes, somebody correctly said USA, and now because what the US has, while we don't have while we do have expensive labor, here's what we do have, which gives us a huge edge. We have the most advanced technology in the world, and we also have a lot of extremely well-trained people. And so what that means then is that we can make computer chips more inexpensively than other countries. And in fact, many countries can't make them at all. So because of that, we make them here and let other countries make products in which it might not make so much sense. In other words, the US can focus on, computer chips and iPhones and laptops. And, also the US is very strong in areas that require a lot of capital investment, like aircraft. As you can probably imagine, building a 747 is a major, major undertaking. And it's not something that a lot of countries are able to do. So because we have an edge in capital equipment and in training and knowledge, a product like that will most likely be made in an advanced country like the United States. So the US will focus on very high-end products, and then we'll import the rest from other countries where maybe labor is a little bit cheaper, because what's the point of our making our own jeans when we can get them more cheaply from somewhere else? Or how about coffee? Where does most of our coffee come from?
I'm just throwing something out there. I know Vietnam is good with coffee.
Okay, yes. Anywhere, basically in general, Southeast Asia has excellent soil. South America too. A lot of it, in fact, I read somewhere that most coffee in the world actually comes from Brazil, but a large percentage of it comes from Southeast Asia, like Indonesia, like you said, Vietnam, and also the Horn of Africa. Ethiopia, for example, has excellent coffee. So where in the US would coffee tend to grow well? What do we know about coffee? What kind of weather does it need? That's right. It has to be hot. What state, think of a state in the US where it's always going to be hot. That's true, but in spite of that, almost all of our coffee in the US tends to come from Hawaii. That's a major source of coffee in the United States, and you can see why. Obviously, they get plenty of rain, and it's very, very hot there. So that's where we get our own coffee, but still, is it enough to satisfy the demand of all Americans? Not even close. Americans consume enormous amounts of coffee. And in a case like that, our climate is really not particularly well suited for coffee for the most part. So we buy it from other countries where the climate is much better suited. Now, here's an area where the U.S. has started muscled into it in recent decades, and that would be wine. Where does wine grow really well in the United States?
California.
That's right. The Napa Valley is one of the best wine growing regions in the world. That's right. In fact, so much so that they're making the French nervous. Let's put it that way. Traditionally the French were considered, and the Italians, to have the best wines in the world, but the U.S. is getting right up there. Those guys have to stay on their toes, because American wines are becoming very in great demand throughout the world. So it stands to reason that the U.S. should focus on growing wine, because that's what we're good at. And then if there's more than we need, we sell it to other countries. Not that we shouldn't buy other wines from other countries, but we'll produce a lot of wine and sell it on the international markets. So basically, the way trade works is that countries will tend to focus on producing things that they're very good at, and then they buy the rest from foreign countries. It's basically not feasible or practical for any country to be completely self-sufficient. Okay, it doesn't make any sense. Why should we do everything for ourselves when other countries can do it more cheaply? So a lot of the products that we know and love are actually produced in other countries. Again, just because it's cheaper to produce those products in those foreign countries. Man, so if now you might start looking very carefully at the things you're buying, like your laptop. Some of that may have actually been built in the United States, but a large percentage of it was not. The parts that go into it, the raw materials were probably imported, and some of the labor was probably done in Southeast Asia, especially China, because it's cheaper. All right. In fact, the interesting thing, what's different now than many years ago, is it used to be a product would be made entirely in one country. Now it can be built with parts from all over the world. In fact, I bet we could find an article on the internet if we look hard enough, which where do the inputs come from in, let's say, a MacBook Pro. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Oh, they misunderstood me completely. What percentage, how about this, of an Apple computer, let's say, comes from the US? That might be a good place to get started. Oh, no, that's not what I wanted either.
Why don't you try components?
Why would we what? Oh, components. Oh, what? Okay. All right, that's a good idea. What components of an Apple computer are, let's say, are imported? That might do it. Well, all right. I I thought it'd be easier than this. All right. We'll worry about this some other time, but I thought it might be interesting to see where all the different components of an Apple computer actually are coming from. But I would say the majority of them are not coming from the US. But all right, so we can investigate more of that later on. But trade between countries is growing like crazy. And you can see, for example, in the years between 2000 and 2016, the volume of trade throughout the world went from 6.4 trillion to $16 trillion in 2016. And I'm sure it's much higher today. So what's happening is countries are beginning to realize that they can improve their well-being by focusing only on the things that they're very good at and trading for the things that they're not so good at. Now, when you come right down to it, this is how individuals are too. In other words, when you stop and think about it, let's say when you graduate and you're working somewhere, are you going to try to grow your own food? No, why not? Well, do you know the first thing about gardening?
No.
No. So wouldn't you be better off using that time to work more and earn more money and then just buy the vegetables you need in the supermarket where they know what they're doing, or they bought it from farmers who know what they're doing? Of course. Are you going to try to make your own clothes? No, why not?
I don't know how to make clothes.
That's right. So why don't you spend more time working at your job? It's something you're good at, and use your money to buy clothes from people who actually know how to make clothes. So in a way, you're kind of doing the same thing, because what you're doing is you're specializing in what you're good at and letting other people take care of the rest. And so this is what global trade is really all about. Countries just doing what they do best and trading for the rest. Okay, so that volume of trade keeps growing and growing and growing, because all these countries recognize that this is the way to make themselves as well off as possible, rather than being stubborn and trying to do everything for themselves. Okay, so this is the target, this is the goal of trade. But remember, now this is not going to work unless we really do it this way. We have to make sure that we only focus on what we're good at. And that way, the total output of all goods and services throughout the world will increase above what they would have been if nobody was trading. Okay, now GDP, we're going to discuss this in great detail in later chapters, but in a nutshell, GDP represents the value of all the goods and services that are produced in the United States during a given year. So GDP is to a country more or less what annual income is to an individual. By the way, just as a guess, now this is only up to 2017. Right about now, what would you think is the value of US GDP? What number makes sense to you? Okay, yes. Somebody already knows. It's $20 trillion. Is that a lot of money? It sure is. Is that the biggest in the world? Yes, it is by a long shot. Oh, God, yes. In fact, even back in 2017, look at these numbers. Now, you see, China is definitely catching up with us. But look at how far behind some of these other countries are, even Japan. Not, like maybe a quarter of what we are producing. Oh, you saw somewhere that Texas' GDP is bigger than Russia. That doesn't surprise me. Russia, for all of its reputation being a big, powerful country, is actually not that terribly well advanced compared to a lot of these Western European countries. And even though they don't have communism anymore, their economy is still dreadfully inefficient. And so I'm not surprised to hear that. So Texas alone, more than Russia. Wow, that's pretty cool. But yes, you can see by a long shot, the United States is by far the biggest economy in the world. Although, of course, like I said, the Chinese economy is growing very quickly. So, but their population, I mean, if you think India's population is big, what do you suppose China's is? Let's find out. Before we see it, I'm going to guess around 1.6 billion. What do you think? Does that sound?
Well, I know that yeah.
Only 1.4. So India's catching up with them. I didn't know that. I thought it was China's population was still quite a bit larger than India. All right. Well, the US is about 330 million the last time I checked. Oh, all right. Just a hair under 330 million. That's about what I figured. So that's big, but it's nothing compared to India and China. So now, as India is down here somewhere. They still have a ways to go to catch up with us. And so all these other countries as well. Now, resources. Now, of course, a lot of this is driven by resources. The U.S. has a lot of natural resources. Of course it does. It has minerals, it has oils, it has oil, natural gas, and coal, but it also has an extremely well-educated population. And you can't overlook the importance of that because a lot of the products, I mean, one thing the U.S. is definitely known for is producing exciting new products that everybody wants to buy, like iPhones, all right? And all the rest are often developed in the United States. And that's because, again, and a lot of it comes down to entrepreneurs putting together their resources to produce goods and services that people want. And so a lot of important products are developed in the United States, but we also have a lot of natural resources. So does China. But China has a disadvantage for all practical purposes. I mean, China is still technically a communist country, but they have an incredibly capitalistic economy. Now, it wasn't always that way. Up until the 70s, they were just like any other communist country where there was no such thing as capitalism at all. Everybody had to do what the government told them. And so you can imagine what their economy was like. What do you think their economy would have looked like while it was still a truly communist country?
People had like these jobs that were called like the Iron Rice Bowl, and you would have that job until death.
Right. And did they produce anything useful in those jobs?
No, like a lot. I mean, during the Great Leap Forward, like 30 million people died, and like they basically ruined like all the metal in their country. You know, so
So all of a sudden, one day, they realized, we're falling further and further behind. Maybe we should lighten up in that anti-capitalist stuff. And all of a sudden, they allowed the people to have essentially a capitalist economy, but with a communist government. And you've seen the results for yourselves. The growth that they've experienced since then has been phenomenal, to say the least. And it just keeps going. And eventually, one day, though, the two will probably run into conflict with each other. And the reality is it's going to be very awkward to have a quickly growing economy and still a communist government trying to control everything. So down the road, something's got to give. It'll be interesting to see what happens there. But they've really made a huge leaps forward, and they've really not completely caught up with us, but they're really gaining on us very quickly. Now, Japan has no resource. I mean, it's essentially a group of islands. They have very little land. They have no natural resources to speak of, and yet somehow it's the third largest economy in the world. Now, you probably are aware that, let's face it, the whole country was destroyed during World War II. And yet here they are, 70, 80 years later, and it's the third largest economy in the world. What happened? Well, I'll tell you what happened to them. Capitalism is what happened to them. They became the most ultra-capitalist country in the world, or among them. And before you know it, they're one of the most powerful economies in the entire world. And you could say the same thing about Hong Kong and Singapore and some of those countries in Southeast Asia. They have very little land, very few resources, and yet somehow they're among the richest people in the world. All right, so who trades with us? Everybody, but who's the largest trade partner? Okay, again, one of these bar charts, you can see for the longest time, Canada was our #1 trading partner, but they've since been eclipsed by China. Okay, Canada is still #2. We trade enormous amounts with Canada and also Mexico, partially because of the NAFTA agreement and the new one that's replacing that. We tend to do a lot of trade with Canada and Mexico. But of course, we also trade a lot with Japan and Germany and South Korea and the UK. But the majority of our trade right now comes from China. All right. So is anyone surprised to see that? No, you're not surprised because a lot of the electronic goodies that you have were ultimately built in China. Okay, so that should come as no shock to anyone. So, but you see, that's why it gets ugly when we have problems with China and we, start, let's say, getting upset with each other. That could threaten a lot of this trade. So this is why the markets get nervous whenever we have conflicts with China. We don't have conflicts with Canada. I mean, Canada is another democratic society. Has anyone ever been to Canada? Well, it depends on where you go. But I mean, if you go to Canada, you'll realize pretty quickly it's a lot like the US. I mean, a lot like the US. Oh, right. And how cool is it up there? It's pretty cool up there. And what's interesting about Canada is that a lot of US companies are operating there. But I was in Canada once and I found out something interesting. If you're an American company in Canada, let's say you're McDonald's, the McDonald's in Canada are identical to the ones in the US, except for one little thing. They're required to have a little tiny maple leaf on their sign. So it's a Canadian McDonald's. That's absolutely true. I don't know why they insist on that, but it's true. And sometimes when you go to Canada, though, you can take advantage of the exchange rate because often the Canadian dollar is weaker than the US dollar. And you can go up there and get a lot of bargains. Okay, so yes, we'll have this discussion at another time in the course. But the strength of the dollar will be a major influence on how much it costs to buy of foreign products. And that includes vacations in those foreign countries. Okay. So interestingly enough, if you're in Canada, it's been my experience that you don't even need to trade your dollars for Canadian dollars. They'll take US dollars. They won't ever say no. But in most countries, that's not the case. Like if you go to England, you've got to use pounds. They will not take dollars. But if you've ever been to the Caribbean, like Jamaica or Bermuda or the Bahamas, has anyone been to any of those places? What did you notice when you were buying things? Oh, Quebec, really? I'm a little surprised to hear that, but I'm not surprised since it is a French-speaking province. But if you went to Ontario, you probably wouldn't have to bother. Okay, so you've had that experience. But if you've been to the Bahamas or Bermuda, has anyone been there? If so, what did you notice when you just went out to buy things? Did they require you to use the local currency?
I've been there once. It was multiple years ago.
Okay.
So I don't really remember, but I do
Oh.
remember having to like exchange some dollars, but I don't remember if
Oh.
I had to use them.
Okay. All right. Interesting enough, because yes, for the most part, not only do they not require you to use the local currency, they would actually prefer that you use US dollars. Oh, really? What country was that?
I went to the Bahamas. Yeah.
Surprised because I've been there and they took dollars like, in fact, I almost never saw the local currency anywhere. Now, keep in mind, for these countries, their primary source of earnings is tourism. And the majority of the tourists that they get are coming from the United States. So they're going to do whatever it takes to make things easy for Americans to spend money in their countries. In fact, there's this massive casino in the Bahamas, which you've probably heard of, called Atlantis. And I was actually in there once, and I tried to put the local currency into one of the slot machines, and it refused to work. And I was informed at the casino that those machines only take US dollars. They don't even want their own currency. They only want US dollars. Why do you suppose that is? Why would a country tell you to use dollars instead of their currency?
US dollars worth.
Because it's strong. That's right. The dollar's stronger. They're happier to have dollars because they can use that to buy more products, especially from foreign countries. So they'll be very happy. In fact, I was actually in Mexico once, and I was in a store, and I had both currencies in my wallet. I said, "Which one do you want?" And they said, "We don't take pesos." This is in Mexico, for God's sake. They told me they would not take the pesos. They only wanted my dollars. And again, it's the same reason, because the peso is quite weak in this point in time. And so dollars are worth a lot more to them than pesos. Okay, so anyway, now we're going to take a look at this so-called circular flow model. This is something you often see in textbooks. It's really just meant to show us how the different sectors of the economy are related to each other. None of them are independent. And so we're going to look at households, which means consumers, the goods markets where people buy and sell goods and services, the factor markets where resources are sold, business firms, and the government. Okay, these are the main actors in the economy. So it can also be used to show interactions between the United States and the rest of the world. Okay, now it gets a little messy, but it's nice. We're only going to look at it just this once. We're not going to spend too much time with it, but it is an interesting attempt to illustrate how resources flow between these different sectors in the economy. So, for example, let's look at this first one. And again, the goods markets are where goods and services are bought and sold by consumers, and the factor markets are where the resources of production are traded, like land, labor, and capital. All right, here we go. Households provide resources to the factor markets, and they receive in return wages, rent, interest, and profits. In other words, the households are ultimately the owners of all of these resources. The government doesn't really have ownership as such, like the households do. The households own the majority of the resources in the economy, and they expect to be paid in order for them to make these available. So okay, here we go. Now, like I said, it's a bit involved. Here's the households. And this red arrow means that they buy goods and services in the goods market. The companies that receive this money right, okay, this is the market itself, but the firms that produce these goods then receive the revenues down here. In order to run their businesses, though, they need to acquire capital, land, labor, and entrepreneurship. And in order to do so, they must pay rent, wages, interest, and profits. Those ultimately go back to the households because they're the ones who supply these resources, especially the labor. And so then the labor, the money comes into the pockets of the households, and then they buy more goods and services. That provides more funding to the firms. They use that to hire more land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, and that generates more incomes for the households. Now, in the opposite direction, the firms sell us goods and services, which we buy, and then we trade our land, labor, and capital and entrepreneurship into the factor markets and sell them to the firms. So you can see how this flow takes place between all four of these sectors, and it all has to balance out. That's the key detail. Everything has to balance at the end of the day. So this is a good way that we can determine the size of the economy by looking at these flows between the different sectors. Okay, now what if we want to complicate this a little? We're going to sneak into the center here, government. Now, you can see the government sucks up taxes from the households and the firms, but then they provide what we're going to call transfers back to the households and the firms. Okay, these are payments for whatever you can think of. Like, for example, it might include subsidies to these firms or Social Security payments to the households. They also, at some point, do buy goods and services. Like, for example, the government needs computers and they need office furniture and all this and that. So they're also major customers of the goods market. So we sneak them into the middle, but you notice they don't affect directly the factor markets. All right, now, what else can we do to this diagram? We can look at the rest of the world. The US buys imports from abroad in the goods market. Those expenditures go into the pockets of foreigners who produce those products. And now what this diagram is trying to show us, by the way, is that if we buy more products from foreigners than they sell back to us, let me mention this separately. And again, we'll see more of this later on in the course. This is just meant to be an overview. If the US buys more goods and services from the rest of the world than it sells to the rest of the world, this is known as okay, now I'm going to see if you know what this is called. What happens if we buy more products from foreigners than they buy from us? We call this a
deficit.
A trade deficit, yes. Now, does the US typically have a trade deficit every year?
I think.
Yes, we do. In fact, some years the trade deficit is quite considerable. Most years, and again, this is something we'll look at later on in the course, the US trade deficit is at least $300 billion and has been as high as 800 billion. And that's in 1 year. Now, here's a good excuse to have a poll. All right. We all love these polls, don't we? Yes, that's good. Then we can do some more. If you say that you don't love them, we won't do them. But when was the last time? By the way, let me just mention this before I go any further. If the opposite happens, we have what's called a trade surplus. I just want to mention that. So here's my question in the poll. When was the last time the US had a trade surplus? Okay. Oh, wait, that actually has to be down here. All right, here we go. Okay. Let's give this a shot. All right, that's a lot of votes. Oh, there's more coming. Okay. Okay, I guess we're done. Yes, the correct answer is in fact 1991. Oh my God, 30 years without a trade surplus. Okay, now it isn't quite as bad as 1776. Wow. So that reminds me, here's another poll we could take. This is not related to trade deficits. It's a different kind of deficit. What do we call it when the government spends more money than it takes in taxes?
Budget deficit.
A budget deficit. Yes. Now, there's two kinds of deficits. There's the current budget deficit, and then there's the total amount of money that the government owes from past years as well. Right now, that number is around the same size as the economy, about $20 trillion. So it turns out, okay, well, you'll see when I ask the poll. Debt, U.S. debt. Who was president the last time the U.S. had no debt? All right, here we go. Kennedy. We're veering over into U.S. history a little bit, but that's okay. This is kind of important because it directly impacts on the strength of the economy. So we're allowed to ask this question. All right. Well, you know what? I'm surprised, but most of you got it right. It is Andrew Jackson. What years are we looking at here? The 1820s, the 1830s? Yeah, like late 1820s, early 1830s. That's the last time the US government had no debt. It's been all downhill since then. Ooh. Maybe that's why he's on the $20 bill. I don't know. I'm not sure how that decision was made, but yes, he's that guy. So if you would like, let's say if you are frugal then Jackson is your man. Okay. All right. So I'll tell you what, now it looks like we're kind of done with this. This was meant to be another sort of introductory chapter, a little bit more of an overview. So we may as well go grab chapter 3 and start looking at it. I don't remember if I put it on Moodle or not. Yes, it is here. All right, well, let's grab it. At least start to look at it. Okay. Okay, this is different. Now, this is a fairly complex chapter because there's going to be a lot of calculations and some important new graphs, a lot of important new concepts. So we want to go through this fairly slowly to make sure we all understand what's going on. This is no longer an overview chapter. This is one of the most important concepts that we'll cover in the course. So we know perfectly well that resources are scarce. So therefore, in order for us to maximize our well-being, we have to allocate our resources as efficiently as possible. Now, we're going to assume that whatever resources we're using to produce a product, we can use those same resources to produce other products. So we're going to introduce a special kind of graph, which we'll see in a few minutes, called the production possibilities frontier. Now, what is this all about? It's going to show you the combinations of two goods that can be produced with the same resources. Okay, so actually, let me throw that in here. The PPF shows the combinations of two goods that can be produced with the same resources. Okay, so, and this will give us a lot of very important insights. And later on, we'll see that we can use the same graph to help us understand the patterns of trade between different countries. So like so many other graphs in economics, we can get a lot of different useful information out of it. Okay, so let's use our old friend Starbucks. Now, we can use, now espressos, as you know, espresso is just pure coffee. It's just a very strong form of coffee. There's nothing else in there. Lattes are basically cappuccino. Actually, it's espresso with milk, foamy milk built into it. So we can actually make, if we're Starbucks, we can make both lattes and espressos with the same machinery, the same equipment, and the same employees. Okay, now obviously, how do we know how many to produce? It depends on the demand from the customers. But the bottom line is we should be able to easily accommodate the demand for both of them. If one day everybody walks in and only wants espressos, not a problem. If one day everybody walks in the door and only wants lattes, not a problem. We can do anything between the two of these, but there's a limit to how much we can make of both. Now, I'm assuming that this is all being made by one employee in 1 hour. Okay, so we can't increase. Now, the important detail here is this. I'm going to add this separately. Note, we are assuming that this is example occurs over a short period of time during which it is impossible to hire more labor, work more hours, acquire more resources, such as coffee beans. So in other words, it's a very short time frame within which we're stuck with what we've got. Okay. In other words, the only way, and what are the consequences of this? The only way The only way to make more lattes is to make fewer espressos and vice versa. This means that there is a direct trade-off between the production of lattes and espressos. All right. In other words, the key here is that we can't have more of both. More of one means we give up some of the other. All right. Now, this chart represents all the combinations of the two goods that we can make, and this is at Starbucks during a given hour. And if you notice, if we want just espressos, we can have 28 of them if we don't make any lattes. If we just want lattes, we can have 30 of them, but no espressos. And we can have anything in between. Okay, now it's hard to tell by looking at this chart, but I want to show you what the graph of this actually looks like. Okay. Oh, now this represents the values I just showed you. We'll explain later on where these 2 points come from. Each of these points is one option from this chart. A, for example, means all espressos, like here. Remember, this is A. G at the bottom represents all lattes. So all of these other ones represent different combinations of these goods. So the key detail here is that all points on the curve, the PPF that is, represent points of maximum efficiency. Okay, that's a huge detail. If I'm producing at any one of these points, that means it is not possible for me to make more of either good without sacrificing the other one. I'm maximizing my efficiency. I've got the best machines. I've got the well-trained employees. Everything's clicking. So these are all the points at which I've maximized the use of my resources. So therefore, that's where I want to be. Now, where I end up producing depends on outside factors like, how much do people want of each product? How much can I sell them for? That kind of thing. So the choice as to where to produce depends on external factors, but I know that I want to be on one of these points no matter what. All right. Now, why don't we consider these other 2 points? Let's take a look at H. If you look at H carefully, you'll notice that I actually, in principle, could make more lattes without losing any espressos because I'm in the same row. Or I can make more espressos without giving up any lattes. What does that suggest to you?
You're not efficient enough.
That's right. Is a point of inefficiency. Resources are being wasted. If otherwise, remember on these out here, these points of maximum efficiency, and if I want more espressos, I have to give up some lattes or vice versa. Here, that's not happening. And that tells me that this point is a point of inefficiency. And in fact, that's going to be true of any point inside that curve. So you could actually make the case that I do not want to ever produce anywhere inside this curve. So think of this as the no-go zone or something like that. This is the caution. Don't produce inside here. Everywhere inside this curve is a point of inefficiency. If I'm in there, that means something's wrong. Maybe the machines are breaking down. Maybe the employee is not as well trained as possible, or maybe they're taking big time breaks. Who knows? So we don't want H, that's for sure. But on the other hand, what's going on with I? Look at B. B is a point of maximum efficiency. If I go from B to I, look what I'm doing. I'm gaining more lattes without sacrificing any espressos. Or if I'm an E, I can have more espressos without losing any lattes. So I would obviously prefer I to either B or E. So why don't I just go out there?
It's unlikely that the demand would be specific like that.
Well, the bottom line is I can't go out there because I don't have the resources needed to produce at point I. In other words, it's better than what I'm doing, but it's not possible. Remember, these points represent points of maximum efficiency. How can I do better than maximum efficiency? I can't unless I have access to more resources. And of course, I'm assuming that I don't. So therefore, points like I are not possible. They would be wonderful, but they're not possible with the resources that we have at the moment. Okay, so I can show that as, I don't know, let's make that yellow. All these points out here would be wonderful, but they're not what we will call feasible. All right, so all that's left to me is the curve itself. That's where I want to be. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is show you or ask you to think about this. What if that changes? What if something changes? Suppose all of a sudden, let me create a new slide here. Suppose that, all right, what's going on here? My PowerPoint is being stubborn. Wow, that's weird. What is it doing here? Oh. Well, it's not letting me type. I don't understand what's going on here. I'd like to type, but it won't let me. What's going on? I've never seen this before. That is so weird. Okay. Oh, finally, for God's sake. All right, here we go. So suppose that the company acquires more resources. Okay, so in other words, we're now looking at a longer time frame. Suppose next year rolls around and the company acquires more resources. It has more coffee beans, or possibly more workers, or maybe it has invested in better equipment. What is this likely to do to our output? What do you think? Now remember,
Will increase it.
Short run. Yeah, well, more output. Yes, exactly. More output. We'll get closer to point I as exactly. In fact, we may even be able to reach I if we have enough resources. So the way we would illustrate that with our curve, remember, this is over a longer period of time, is that we'd have the original curve. And then all of a sudden, the entire curve moves out. And now all of a sudden, I is feasible. Okay. This is the original curve. And this is the new curve. And this can be caused again by a lot of factors. This can be caused by having more resources, but it can also be caused by having improved technology. So the curve shifts out, and so now with the same amount of labor, I can make more of both than I could previously because I've either more resources or else possibly technology is improved. So that means the company will be better off because they can sell more. The consumer will be better off because they'll have access to more coffee. And in fact, it may even be possible to lower our prices as a result of this. So this is good. This is actually good for everyone. And in fact, this is one way in which standards of living increase. Okay, if this is happening for all goods in the economy, then clearly we're better off because we're having more and more resources, more products, and potentially at lower prices, or certainly at better products. And so over time, this is how an economy grows. Now, this one only shows lattes and espresso, but this would be true for all the goods in the economy. And you know perfectly well this happens all the time with high-tech items like laptops. Do they keep getting better over time? Of course they do. And who benefits from that? Well, everybody really, because you get a better laptop and the company gets more profits. And then there are more jobs in that company. So it's a very nice thing to happen. All right. So now the next part is going to be very complex and time consuming. A lot of calculations, which I really would rather not start unless I have time to do it all the way through. So I think we can stop right about here. And we'll carry on Monday, the same time, same place. We'll be right here looking at chapter 3. And I believe I may have some videos that will help explain what we're doing here. And if so, we'll show them on Monday. But we want to dive more deeply into this example because this is awfully important. But then what follows after this is chapter 4, where for the first time, we get to look at supply and demand, which are the heart and soul of all of economic analysis. Okay, so unless there's any last minute questions, I'll see you all on Monday. All right. Very good.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Okay, see you later.
Thank you.
Thank
Have
you.
a great day.
Bye.
Thank you, Professor. Have a good
Later.